Welcome back. So we hope you had a good afternoon sessions, breakout sessions. We hope you took a lot with you. Now, welcome to the very final panel, to the closing panel. COP26 resumed more or less 2 weeks ago. Now, the opinions, of course, are divided. One could have done more. On the other side, for others, it was a triumph, as coal was mentioned for the first time. Now, language and formulation of the agreements are sometimes not so easy to understand. And we went from phasing out, which is a clear target of 0, to phasing down, which leaves a bit of room for interpretation. Finding agreements where all the countries are in line is a complex thing to do. So how do we move forward after COP26? This is what we will be discussing in our closing panel, and I'd like to ask my panelists on the floor. We'll start with Antoine Cyr. He is the Executive Committee and Head of Company Engagement at BNP Paribas. Welcome. You can come here. And then we're also joined by Thomas Vellacott, CEO of WWF Switzerland. Marie-Claire Graaf, Chair of Yongo. Christian Girme, a Costa Rican Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs on Multilateral Affairs. And Xiancheng Chang, Deputy Director of the WTO. Welcome. You're allowed to take your masks off on stage if you want. Yeah. Okay, so I would like to start. Some of you have been to COP, others, of course, followed it. I would like to hear your takeaways from COP26 on the commitments made, and if possible, also from a financial perspective. Maybe let's start with you, Antoine.
Thank you. Well, everybody was expecting the COP to be disappointing. And I know there is a Swiss expression about being disappointed in good or in bad. I guess so. But at the end of the day, it was not completely as disappointing as expected. Yes, for example, the agreement on coal was disappointing because it was about phasing down and not phasing out. And for example, for us, BNP Paribas, our commitment to coal is phasing out. So you have nations that are taken commitments that are less stringent than private actors. But it's also normal because the private actors, they can be at a place and decide to pull out from a place. So we have, when you are in a territory, you have to deal with what is in your territory, and it's more complicated. And in this COP, you could really see emerge the importance of solidarity between countries. Probably the most interesting example that was discussed in the COP was what happened in South Africa. In South Africa, you have developed countries who have helped to pay the phasing out of coal of South Africa. So it's a completely new approach. It is something that was in the Paris Agreement, but in the reality, you never saw such a concrete example of countries saying to another country, okay, we will really help you to fund going out of coal and changing your energy model. So this is something that was done prior to this COP, and it's a very concrete example of something going well. So the commitments are disappointing, but what is done in the reality on the ground is really starting to be the real thing. It's a bit the same thing for the private sector. Of course, a lot of people of the private sector were there to greenwash, and it's true that it was sometimes a bit awkward to see countries that...
You were there at COP,
Yes,
so
yes,
yeah.
I was there. To see countries that had their stand paid by private companies that were here to showcase what they are doing. But at the same time, and I work for a private company, and I was there not to showcase because we didn't have stand, but I was there to discuss with people and to look for concrete solutions. And probably in this COP, more than ever, you had people being there to discuss with each other to find concrete solutions. Mm-hmm. So somewhere as disappointed as expected, but in the reality, a lot of people trying to address the real problems. What is the solidarity between the countries of the North and the countries of the South? How do we concretely address the problems of methane, of electric grids, of all the problems that are concrete, and how private and public sector are working together.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to continue. Yeah, Thomas, would you like to go back?
Yeah, it's really easy to be cynical about COPs, right? And to count the private jets and to do all that spiel. I think that's actually dangerous. It misses the point of what these conferences are about. But if you ask about, was it good or was it bad? Well, it depends what you compare it to.
Yeah. No, the question was not really, was it good or bad, but maybe what, yeah, but your takeaway,
right,
also
okay.
From the perspective also what was done on finance, but we can also get to that.
I'll come to finance. So I think it was a good COP if you compare it with some of the previous ones. I was at Copenhagen. It was a really good COP compared to Copenhagen. But it was completely inadequate when it comes to the kind of issues we're dealing with and the time frame we need to be on. So I think it's important to always have that dual sort of viewpoint that, good development, but hey, we're running out of time, seriously. It was good because we had the rule book on Article 6. We had additional pledges, commitments. We had a very different role played by the private sector than we have in the past. We had the financial sector really playing an important role with things like the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. So it's more of a plurality now than it was even a few years ago, which is positive. We had additional commitments on, you mentioned methane, on forests, etc. So that's all good. But it's still not enough, and I think it's not really sunk in just how little time we have. And, and I'm not talking 2050, I'm talking 2030, having to halve global emissions. We can't just kick the can down the road and say we'll come up with something new next year. That doesn't work anymore. And I think, rather than just pointing at COP, I think that's something we can all take out of any place we go, any event we go on sustainability, that we ask ourselves, are we just talking? Are we just networking? Or are we actually bringing the world closer to the trajectory it needs to be on?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Marie-Claire Graaf, you were at COP yourself.
Yes, it's actually my 4th COP. That's why I was probably not as disappointed, because I already know how it works. And not coming with some crazy ideas what COP can deliver, because at the end of the day, the Conference of the Parties is a place where all 196 countries are coming together and are agreeing on some language in a consensus base. So all of the countries have to agree, and with this, we are never going to achieve the new rocket science or whatever. So there were 4 different areas which were very crucial when we entered this COP. These were basically the 4 leftover items to finally agree on this Paris Agreement rulebook, or basically how we are implementing the Paris Agreement. How do we implement the goals we set ourselves 6 years ago? There was the Article 6, as you already mentioned. This is the carbon trading scheme. We already talked in the morning. It's about the offsetting. And how exactly we are going to do this. There is around finances, about the $100 billion commitment, which unfortunately haven't been achieved again this year, and it's probably not going to be achieved until 2023, which is very worrying because this is what a lot of countries depend on to achieve their own goals. Then there were some leftover items on transparency and how we are measuring each other's or how we are measuring our own commitments. And then the last one was around adaptation and loss and damage. And I think that while we made some progress in the negotiations, so this is basically the negotiation part is where all the countries are coming together and negotiating on the language. And next to this, there were a lot of declarations and pledges. But let me first cover the negotiations. So while we did some progress on some of the negotiated members, for example, we have more money going into adaptation. It's very crucial because no matter, even if you're stopping right now all the emissions, a lot of places around the world have to increase their investments in adaptation, also here in Switzerland, and more severely also in loss and damage. While we did some progress on adaptation, there is zero outcome when it comes to loss and damage. Basically, we agreed on having some dialogues, but it's not helping the people who are already suffering right now from the loss and damage of their lands, of their forests and their livelihoods. And while we concluded the negotiation on Article 6, there is still a lot of concerns, especially also talked in the morning a little bit about it, about issues with land rights and indigenous rights, but also to kind of just postpone the problem to the future instead of tackling it right now. And all of this was done with the aim of keeping 1.5 alive. We are now a little bit closer to this aim with like around 1.8 degrees commitments, but this is only if we are achieving all of these commitments. And the people from Switzerland know that we rejected in summer the implementation of the Paris Agreement in Switzerland with the CO2 law. So not even Switzerland has a concrete plan on how to achieve its own goals, not to talk about many, many other countries in the world. So to conclude, while the negotiations progress, we have seen a lot of commitments, especially also these pledges and declarations, which have very, very little accountability scheme and implementing mechanisms. So there is a lot of talking going on. And what really will show if this is all PR or real action is basically all of us here, and especially also you who are sitting in positions to deliver on all of these commitments and pledges done in Glasgow and all around the world.
Great. Thank you for the call to action.
Thank you very much, and let me, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and let me, please allow me to be a kind of disruptive here, because coming from a developing country, a small one that is fighting against the climate change since more than 50 years, is music for my ears that now people from developed countries are saying there is a sense of urgency on the climate crisis. And this is something for us very important. And if you can say something that has been achieved in Glasgow, is the sense of urgency. There is now, the people are saying, yes, we need to move forward and to be really committed. And I think this is the most important. And as you raise also, the 1.5 still alive. We have a small window, but we need to move forward and now move from words to action, and also to put money on the basket. This is the situation. And I think also what on the corridors of COP, something that was very interesting, it's also the private sector is now taking conscious that there is a business there. And there is a business for small countries like mine to be there also to transform our economies in a sustainable economies and inclusive and green development, which is better for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I was not in Glasgow, but we follow up closely the COP26 because many subjects of the COP are related to the trade and the trade policies. For example, the ending the deforestation and phasing down the coal use, phasing out the inefficient fossil subsidies, and accelerating the clean technology innovation, ensuring the smooth transition of developing countries, so on and so forth. They are all relevant to trade. And so the main takeaway for us is to establish the right linkage, right relationship between trade policy and the environment policy. We have tried, and Thomas mentioned just now, the Copenhagen. Actually, 10 years ago, we follow up the Copenhagen first approach. That means that we would like to see what the governments to achieve on the environment. And then we can follow up to have this multilateral trade policy related to environment. But we failed to achieve that objective 10 years ago during the Doha Development Agenda. But now we have the COP26, we have the Paris Pact in place. It is the right time for establish the relationship between trade policy and environment policy. And the objective is to achieve the so-called win-win-win situation, a win for trade, a win for development, and a win for environment.
Thank you. So you mentioned there were a lot of initiatives that emerged somehow. We're talking about concrete solutions, but we really need to put these into place. So let's talk about how we get further in doing that. There were a lot of net zero pledges, and but there's still room for more, also from the private sector. How can we get more actors, for example, signing one of these alliances, initiatives, and just get on board?
Yeah, at BNP Paribas, we have been a founding member of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, and being working to try to convince a lot of our fellows, sometimes with success, and a lot of people. UNEP FI has done an incredible job to convince a lot of banks to come to this alliance. I really believe that what we have to do now is to prove it works. The most important is to prove it works. And I am in a bank that have been founded more than 150 years ago to finance the industrial revolution. So we bear all the carbon of the industry. It's a reality, because the industry we have been financing, and with a lot of people asking us to finance it over the last 150 years, is carbonated. And it was not making it carbonated was simply not a criteria of our decisions for, let's say, 140 years. It started to become a criteria maybe 10 years ago, and it accelerated with the Paris Agreement. But now, what have we to do? We have, first of all, we have to make it a real criteria of our decisions. So we have to make it a part of the way we pilot our lending and our investment portfolio. And we have to have the right tools to do it, and to take the decision, and to take commitments sector by sector. We are working on sector-based tools, and this is something which is expected from all the banks. And if we don't do that, the pledges will not work. We need also to take measures of phasing out the most polluting activities. Coal. Every bank has to have a plan to phase out coal. If we don't do that, it will not work. But we know that we have also to face the reality, but we have to do it. After, we have to create within our banks the infrastructures. If, a bank has been working on data, on financial data since several centuries. Now we have to work on other data. So we have to be able to mull the data, to get the data, to source the data, to make sure that they are consistent with the reality. So it's a huge transformation. So being able to deliver those commitments is an incredible transformation work, maybe as important and maybe even more important than the digital revolution. So that's exactly what we have to do. So I hope other banks will join us in those pledges, but I can tell you that being really in an organization that has understood what it means and and who is having hundreds of people, including maybe 20% of the time of the CEO involved in this transformation, I can tell you it's really a serious job to be done.
So you mentioned you need to prove how it works, you need to get the right tools. Is there a way that, I don't know, for instance, WWF could help in getting certain tools?
Well, we are working with many companies on exactly that, because I think there's really three challenges we need to address now. One is one of speed, one of scale, and one of quality. And I think on speed, we now see a lot of commitments made for 2050. That's great, but that's not enough. We need to see 2030 commitments, and we need to see commitments of what will happen tomorrow. So the IEA was very clear, no more investment into fossil fuel infrastructure starting now. So we had a long discussion this morning, or discussions about how to measure and all that. That's all great, but there's not that much you need to measure when it comes to stop investing in fossil fuel infrastructure. It's fairly simple. So there's something around speed, there's something around scale. In the last 2 years, net zero has become the worldwide standard. 2 years ago, we had about a quarter of worldwide emissions covered by net zero commitments. Now it's over 80%. So it's gone to becoming the standard. I'm surprised how many companies still don't have net zero commitments. I mean, under which rock have they been hiding? You know, if you've been watching, you know where the thing is going. I was told that only something like 15 Swiss financial institutions had net zero commitments. That surprised me. So, yeah, I would suggest move on with net zero commitments. And finally, quality. We've seen a lot of declarations. Now we need to go for quality. We need to make sure that net zero doesn't just become the latest fad that you can throw out and then you've basically unshackled yourself of any responsibility. Now you need to come up with, you mentioned it, transition plans. What are you going to be doing tomorrow? What are going to be the interim milestones? So I think in terms of bringing others on board, and that's where I see our role as an NGO as well very much, not solving that on our own, but working with others in developing those standards such as science-based targets. We heard about that earlier, where you have credible commitments which are backed up by action, because we cannot afford empty words anymore.
Anything you would like to add?
Yeah, well, just to follow up what you mentioned, I mean, there has been a lot of voluntary pledges, declarations, but at the end of the day, the Paris Agreement itself is also a voluntary commitment from the governments, and there is very little actions we can actually hold them accountable and then building pressure from the streets, and this is what we also have been doing, many young people and also young people around the world. But what I think is really important is moving away from this, or moving ahead from these voluntary pledges to the transition plans, as you mentioned, but they go even one step ahead and build regulatory frameworks which actually are enshrined in the Constitution, which are enshrined in the policy making, that actually there is something where we can hold them accountable, because very, very often the leaders tell us, like, yeah, you can hold us accountable, this is your job. I don't think this is the job of young people to hold the generation to account which messed up so many different things, but actually you make it very hard to even hold them accountable, because the pledges are in a way you cannot even hold them accountable. And also this morning, I think very often it was mentioned also by the Swiss government, we are looking for transparency, and then we are doing some ratings, but we are not really going to label them as good or bad, or we are not really going to take some companies off, or we don't basically want to put someone off, right? And this is, I think, very dangerous, because this is, again, like just showing, like, while we're in the midst of a climate and biodiversity crisis, we're not acting as we are in a crisis, because basically we just give some advice and give some transparency, or first we're asking for voluntary transparency, and then we maybe give some regulations on transparency, but this is not how we're solving a crisis. When in the beginning of the pandemic, we didn't know if the masks are actually going to work, yet we just implemented it, and we were all glad that actually we had the mask. We started to develop the vaccines while not yet knowing which one is going to be the right one, but we invested because we knew what it takes. And for the climate crisis, before I was born, we already knew what the problem is, the fossil fuels and land degradation. This was all known before I was born, right? So we don't yet have to come up in 2021 to build some transparency frameworks and see, this is all important, but we need to go, when we see the challenge ahead, we have to be much faster and really move these regulatory frameworks. And I'm inviting everyone to really work hand in hand. There are parties in Switzerland and parties around the world, there are governments and the coalitions who are working on these regulatory frameworks to really put it in the constitution, in the laws, to make it easier for everyone, and at the end also the financial institutions to actually work, because if they know what is the right and what is the wrong, it's easier for us to plan. So I think this is really important. And one point on the coal, if this is the first time in a UNFCCC decision, or actually in a UN decision, where coal is actually written in there. So it's good that it's in there, but why is only coal in there? Why is there no mentioning of oil and gas? Well, we can all blame India now for this, and China and for others, that they want to phase down instead of phase out. But actually, it's very honest, because they can't, and we didn't, the rich countries didn't deliver the financial commitment needed, the financial commitment which was already there, for them actually to transition out. It's the first time India has been saying they're going to be net zero by 2070. Then they were blamed for being too late, but at least they are honest. And the rich countries didn't deliver, and there was no blame, or almost no blame, just some NGOs and some movements who blamed the rich countries, including Switzerland, for not paying their fair share. And again, of course we can now put it all on India and some other countries for phasing down the coal, but there is no mentioning of oil. Why has no one been standing up and saying we are a phase out of oil? Why is no one standing up for saying there is a phase out of gas? Because a lot of private companies, including probably one of them, I don't know exactly your portfolio, but still investing heavily in oil and gas, and they don't want to phase it out, right?
We have a phase-down plan.
But
it's not a phase-out. No,
exactly.
It's not a phase-out, but it's a few banks have a phase-down plan, and we have one.
But then let's make a phase-out plan, right? Then we cannot blame the Indians.
No. You know, we had no plan. We have now the phase-down, and we will have the phase-out. And I know it's an urgency, but we have come from nothing like everybody to being the ones who have a phase-down. We will increase the phase-down, and I hope with something which is coherent with the urgency, we will be able to provide the phase down. But I cannot, I'm in a listed company, so
so maybe let's see before COP27 if you can also phase out, and then we can also urge India to phase out of coal. I just wanted to say that it's actually very tricky, and it's easier to blame than the other countries are not delivering, and I would really like to see that there is a phasing out of oil, coal, gas, and all the fossil fuel industries, and that also we have backup by the financial communities in all of the fossil fuels together.
Thank you. According to Climate Action Tracker, Costa Rica is one of the very few countries that has adequately designed net zero targets. So Christian, I wonder, how have you done it?
Look, it's a very challenging situation. It's not easy because we face exactly the same problems that all the developing countries. We have a very small, also due to the crisis and also the past, a very small fiscal space in the sense that we don't have too much possibilities to borrow money in the markets and in those the situations that are now. In the conditions that are now in the market. And this is what I think is the most important. If we are talking about financing the new word that we want, green development, inclusive and green, but we not yet find the tools and those institutions that can finance in a different way development. We still been in the situation that are extraordinaries with the same business as usual. And may I say that not only in the private sector, I'm very pleased that know that there are some people from the private sector that is really committed, and what you say is amazing that there are countries and companies in developing countries that are developed that don't have zero emissions targets on their own. But in the multilateral system, on banking and financing on the multilateral, we still have the same criteria and the same situations. It's very, very hard to change that. And it's crazy, and also the pandemic shows us. We have a situation, extraordinary situation, a extraordinary crisis. We are facing so many challenges, but the conditions and the tools that we still have for fight this crisis are the same. We're still on Bretton Woods institutions, and we need to change that. And for sure, you say this is the decisions of the owners of those multilateral institutions, which are the states. But the difference is that there are bigger states and small states. Even if we are pay or we can borrow money by commitment, for sure Costa Rica will be very rich, as his name, Costa Rica. But we are facing now the situation that we cannot move forward if we don't have extraordinary measures. And that's why I was raising the sense of urgency. Because in Paris, we already have those pledges and commitments to have a lot of money. And we have Article 6. And just now, in COP in Glasgow, we had this advancement on Article 6. And not what we were, as beginning you were saying, that for sure is not what we were expecting, but at least we are moving forward. But I think that we need to show more commitment, to think out of the box. I don't have the solution. At least I think that we have behaved and motivate others by example. Is what we are trying to do in a very humble way in Costa Rica, to try, if we have tourism, we try to be this tourism sustainable. If we are doing, we're trying to bring companies to Costa Rica to produce, to have the electricity by sustainable means, things like that, that can be also an example for others to follow.
Thank you. Anything to add on that, or? Otherwise,
yeah.
I have a specific question to the...
Actually, I'm not a financial expert, but as far as I know, to achieve the clean energy technology objective, we need around $4 trillion per year. But according to the value asset of the management global financial system, which topped 100 trillion last year. So I think we have money there. The key challenge is how to help the developing countries to get access of those finance. And actually, we don't need to newly mobilize those 4 trillion per year. Many investment on infrastructure is there, and many investors are ready to make investment in developing countries. So the challenge is how to help the developing country to get those investment, and how to get access to those climate products market. And on the phasing down of coal use, I want to share with you my personal experience. Before the COP, United States reached an agreement with China, and China made a commitment to stop financing coal-powered plant abroad. It's a big step forward. I'm now working in the WTO, but 7 years ago, I was the Vice Minister in China responsible for outbound investment. I was involved in many coal power plant projects. And that's during the Obama administration. The envoy of climate change of the United States went to my office, asked China to stop the finance of those power plants. I say, why? If there's a demand of the developing countries, if they have the coal and we have clean energy, why we stop this? So there's no agreement. But now, 7 years later, we reach agreement. I think it's an important step forward. I'm glad to see that. But I also recognize there's a challenge for the developing country, how to help them to transit to the clean energy. The argument is still there. The energy of sun, of wind power, that's fine. But how to help those developing countries to get the stable supply of this renewable energy? How to help them to establish the stable national garage? So that's the challenge. So I understand why in COP26 there is the stipulation to help the developing country to achieve the smooth transition.
So there's a lot of challenges. If we look ahead, what will be your priority what should we tackle next? What would be also the easiest, the low-hanging fruit that one could tackle, maybe also from the perspective of the financial sector, industry? What could be done within the next 12 to 24 months?
I thought you were going to say hours.
Yeah. Do you have any?
No, maybe it will take a bit more than 24 hours, but I see, you know, we have to be, working for a bank, I try to be at the same time very humble with this and very passionate. Very humble because we are in an ecosystem where all stakeholders have their problems, and we are just one part of the ecosystem. And at the same time, very passionate because we have to change an organization. We have to change the way this organization works with the outside. And you know, a very complicated combination of processes and passion to get the job done. But one thing we can do is that we have a lot of clients. We are working with the industry. We are both a lender, and we have also an asset management arm which is working with the companies. And we really can engage and engage more and more with those clients. It's a bit like was said a few minutes before. 3 or 4 years ago, when we engaged with some client in the energy sector, in coal, but also in oil and gas, they told us, but what are you talking about? What is this? And now, when we are talking about net zero and about phasing out or down of fossil fuel, they understand what we are talking, and it's a complete different situation. And for example, I can give you examples of companies around the world, companies in Asia, in Hong Kong, or in other countries that have been that have taken net zero 2050 commitments, but also phasing out of the coal commitments because we have been with some other financial actors engaging with them. So we have to be relentlessly to engage with our clients, sometimes to stop to work with the clients that with whom it's impossible to discuss. And yes, in 2020, we stopped to work with 50% of the power electricity company with whom we did work before. It's a huge number. I don't know exactly if we didn't make any mistake in where we drew the line, but we drew the line. But we did this to prove that when we engage with client, we are doing seriously. It's the same when we have stopped to work with all the specialists of unconventional oil and gas, also to prove that when we engage, we are engaging seriously. But we also need to engage with the clients. It's really essential, and it starts to give results. It's a different situation than a few years ago. So I hope it will accelerate and deliver much accelerated results in the next year or maybe 2 years.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think the answer to your question of what to do in the next 24 months or hours will depend very much on who you're talking to. But since we're in Switzerland and talking in a financial context, let's take that as what can we do here. And I'm not sure if it's the low-hanging fruit, but I think it's the necessary fruit, which is to move from words to actions and to really differentiate Switzerland in terms of in what way is finance in Switzerland more credible when it comes to the transition than other places in the world. We heard quite a lot today about, we have this great tradition in Switzerland, you know, we talk to each other, we have these institutions here. That's all great, but at the end of the day, that doesn't count. What counts is whether we do it better than other places, not because we want to be in a race, but because we need urgency. And I'll just give you one example. The UK government came out during the Glasgow COP and said they wanted to be the first net zero aligned financial centre worldwide. Now, there's a lot of hot air in that, but they did say some very important things, like they are going to be asking from every financial institution and every larger corporate, not just disclosure, but a transition plan. Well, that's an important step. That's something you can, and they were going to have a commission to actually make sure that it's the gold standard and not just any old blah, blah commitments. So it's those kind of things I think that we need to look for. Or what you just mentioned, you know, the companies you moved out of, the 50% that you moved out of.
We moved because they didn't have transition plans.
So that's what we need, things we can measure. You know, it's nice to come together and network and hobnob, but at the end of the day, we need those facts. We need to show facts, and that's where I think we're a bit too slow. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, and you also mentioned it's the UK, it came from the government, but it can also come from the private sector, just to be leaders in that and not followers as well.
I think the climate doesn't really give a hoot if it comes from the government or from the private sector, as long as it happens, and as long as it happens credibly, and as long as it's not just hot air. Now, I think there's a good argument which you made about it helps when it's actually enshrined in law and not just good intention. But at the end of the day, what counts is the result. And if we want to do it one way, as long as it works, that's the way we should be doing it. But I do see other countries where the governments are stepping up much more than I'm seeing it here.
So you wish more.
And not just the governments, but in particular, the financial regulators and the central banks. You know, there's a network for greening the financial system worldwide where central banks are working together. That is hugely important because that sends the kind of messages which hopefully will get institutions to change their lending practices eventually. So we need those regulators on board. And someone from the Swiss central bank recently came out and said, oh, that's not within our mandate. That's a discussion we had 5 years ago. That's, you know, the Network for Greening the Financial System moved beyond that and said this is relevant for stability of the financial system. We have a mandate. So we really, really, really have to start moving and not just saying we're the best because we have all these institutions in our country. That won't do.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to add on what you just mentioned, I think that it's really, really important that we, I mean, transition plans are great, but I really want to see that we have a strong regulatory framework here in Switzerland, which is helping all of us here in this room to actually move forward, to actually deliver on this net zero plan 2050 we have in Switzerland. This is like way too late, especially for Switzerland with such historic emissions and such a huge responsibility. But without this, it's going to be like a lot of hot air, and it's going to be giving a lot of insecurity when it comes to medium and long-term investments. So I think we really need the regulatory frameworks, and different parties and also different NGO groupings and the Climate Alliance are considering and working on this, and we are also welcoming all the banks who are progressive and really want to work alongside us so that we don't only come up in 2025 with some transparency measures or some overview on what could be done, but actually like really putting the actions in place, because this was the last climate COP where we're talking about the commitments and talking about having actually this kind of negotiations. But the next one, because now it's all set, we have the goals, we have the plan, now we have to go into the implementation. And the next one, COP27 in Egypt and later on in the UAE, is going to be about the implementation. And we are failing if we are not actually living up to this, and if you're not coming up with the actions. And all the countries, I think, which is actually one of the biggest successes of this COP, is that all the countries have been asked to update their national climate plans until next year, and not in 5 years again, as it was previously seen in the Paris Agreement, because there is a system that every 5 5 years. You have to bring forward the most ambitious climate plan, and now they made an urgent statement, talked about the urgency before, that all of the countries have to do this until next year. Let's see how this moves ahead, because Switzerland handed in an NDC which is not compliant with what we have nationally, because we rejected our updated CO2 law. But this gives the urgency we need, and this also gives the urgency to the private sector, what is needed when it comes to the action. So we talked about the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, which is of course great. It's great to join, but this is not going to be enough. There is a lot of issues of transparency. There is a lot of issues also coming from the NGO sector, that this is about watering down and about long-term commitment. And if there is one sector in the world who is really good at short-term commitments, then it's the financial sector, right? And I'm sometimes wondering, when I'm talking to some of the representatives, and then they're telling me like yeah, you know, like it's very hard to have like these short-term commitments. But this is actually the sector who has like short-term commitments every single day. You know, like when you see on the stock market, on the investments, there's like literally like it's about minutes. And then when it comes to climate commitments, then it's about 2050. This is not compliant, and I really want to see that we have commitments until this end of the year. There is still like more than a month left to get things done and to put the right things on track for the coming months. So we really need to speed up the urgency in this regards, and just because there has also been maybe a little bit less attention in China, or virtually half in China, there was the COP15 about the biodiversity COP, and I think it's really important to also take this in consideration, because we are in a climate crisis and we are in a biodiversity crisis. We heard this morning from Andre Hoffmann how many species already got extinct since he was born. And I think it's really important that while we are trying to do something in regards to the climate crisis, there is no climate action without taking nature and biodiversity into account. And there is no climate action without taking the humans and the indigenous people into account. And there's also no climate action taking the future generations into account. And I think if there is something, when we talk about this unprecedented transformation, what we have to do, to think more about the future generations. Because as long as you only think about us and about our own profit, if it's 2025 or 2030 or 2050, it's not going to work, because at the end of the day we are doing this for the future generations and that they have a planet to live on. And there's actually a very easy way on how you can, because it's very hard to, it's very easy to forget about them, and it's very hard to actually include them. But if you have a meeting, then just put an empty chair in the meeting. And imagine that this is the future generations who are sitting there and judging on your decision. And it's very hard to imagine what they think, but I'm very sure that they don't want to live on a planet with too little oxygen and where everything is exploited and burned down. So try to include the future generations, and if you also want, I mean, there are also like the right of nature, the right of healthy environment, and the right to life at the end of the day. Try to give them a voice, and try to take these views into consideration when you take the decisions, because these are the ones who are systemically excluded in our decision making, and we are the ones who have the responsibility to listen to them, because we know that they also want to have a planet where they can live on. So we talked about trust in the morning, and I think this intergenerational lack of trust can only be restored if we move from the PR to action. And we have seen a lot of PR, and a lot of young people are fed up, and that we have the right so to be fed up, because we have been for too long to be left out with empty promises. And you're the only one who actually can make these commitments and these pledges to real action, and that we cannot accuse you anymore of doing PR. But then we have to see the actions. And it's really up to you if you are delivering the face down or the face off, the facing off, or the facing down or the facing out of coal, oil, and gas. And I'm looking forward to coming back and hearing about the real stories, but also hearing about the honest conversations, and not trying to just avoid the harder conversation, and trying to have the creative accounting and have the offsetting. There is one of the sessions talking about how you can offset your carbon footprint. This is not the way to go, and we all know that it's not the way to go. But for this, we need to have a very honest conversation, and we have to be able to also kind of overcome our own fears in this regard. And I hope that we have these honest conversations and move from the PR to the real actions. Thank you.
Thank you. Now you mentioned a few many things there, which we unfortunately cannot delve deeper into, but I also mentioned in the morning this intergenerational disconnect. It's your future clients, it's the future, and yeah, somehow that could also be one of the low-hanging fruit, just include that generation to the conversation, and not just to the conversation, to actually also sit at the table and decide, and maybe even ask for their perspective and the solution, just to have a challenge, old concept. Christian, now COP27, COP28, how are you working in moving forward? Because now, I mean, the countries have to come up with the concrete plans.
Yes.
What are the next steps?
Yeah. I think that we will continue to talk about the same things. This is unfortunate, but it's going to be the truth. And we have to be realistic. I'm always optimistic, and to work on this kind of foreign policies and climate change, you must be someone very optimistic, because not you switch off and you cross your arms and you don't do anything. But I think that I think that there is three main issues that for us is going to be fundamental. The first is the issue of financing. The financing, but I'm talking not on the private sector of Switzerland, but the multilateral arena and the international financing institutions. We need to sensibilize them that we need to make some changes there. And this is something very important in the sense that there is the G7 and the G20 has a real role to play. And then I think that also the civil society can play a very strong role in the international community also, because the G7 and the G20 has the keys to move the situation internally of these institutions. Second, we cannot avoid or forget the perspective of human rights and environmental integrity in those whole discussions. It's fundamental, because now, after COP, we talk about the development and financing and all the 1.5, but there is another crisis also around there. It's the governance crisis. It's a democracy crisis that we are facing all around the world. And this is something that we need also to take into consideration, and I think that it's very important that everybody takes look on how we mainstream the respect of human rights, the gender perspective, which is fundamental. This is not a very good example here. We have a moderator also, but you are the only panelist speaker here. But we need to have this perspective, which is fundamental also, because the gender perspective can help also in the solutions. And third, as something very concrete, and this is coming back to your question on what we can do on the coming months for climate. The natural-based solutions. This is something that has a really impact on the communities. It's a good business also. It can be good practices. And this is how we can move from words to action and to have impact. Because if the people from the street see the impact on some kind of model of business, and we are respecting the environment, and they have real impact on their life, you're going to have the possibility to change easier the situation.
Thank you. I have actually still a question that I would be interested in the WTO specifically, because we're now reading that the EU also wants to impose tariffs on energy-intense products, steel, cement, aluminium, because climate policy in certain places are not as strict as in the EU. Switzerland is also looking into that. Then we have bans of certain food products that contribute to deforestation. Now, the WTO, of course, helped lift many people out of poverty by lowering barriers to trade, but now there's like kind of a dilemma. So I wonder how you're updating your trade policies, also considering and to address climate change.
Okay, to answer your question, for the low-hanging fruit, we need to continue to take advantage of the existing vehicle and instrument we have. In WTO, we have the Aid for Trade program, which is to mobilize funding for critical infrastructure for green transformation in developing countries and help the private sector to adapt to the climate change. And between 2013 and 2018, over 65 billion US dollars of aid for trade was provided to projects with a climate objective, including renewable power generation, distribution, and energy conservation. So we need to continue to do that. And for the next 24 hours, actually, originally, there would be 3 ministerial declarations in next 24 hours. Unfortunately, last Friday, we canceled the ministerial conference because of the pandemic. It's very unfortunate.
Yeah.
So the 3 ministerial statement covers the trade and environment sustainability structure discussion, which has 66 members, covers 79% of world trade. The second ministerial statement would be the plastic pollution initiative, which has 64 members, covers 65% of world trade. And the third one would be the fossil initiative, the subsidy initiative, which has 38 members, covers 43% of trade. So those the new initiative. It would not take place in the next 24 hours. It's unfortunate, but in the 24 months, there will be serious discussion in the WTO.
But 24 months is so far away. So you want to, how are you now doing that this conference has been postponed or cancelled?
I think those proponents will continue their dialogue, and the mechanism, the platform will be established. The serious trade policy dialogue related to environment will be conducted. I don't know if before Christmas it's not possible, but at the beginning of next year, there will be a serious discussion. So I hope before next COP, the WTO members will be better equipped to the challenge we are facing. And I see more and more consensus generated among the WTO members that trade should be part of the solution of climate change rather than part of the problem.
Yeah, but would you like to still answer the other question about the trade barriers not being imposed yet? I mean, we don't know if the rule by the EU is compatible with the rules of the WTO. I don't know if you can comment on that, but it's kind of a dilemma, isn't it?
Yes, you're right. That the challenge we're facing is to maintain an open, transparent, and predictable trade environment. At the same time, we have to face the challenge about the new issues. For example, the carbon tariff, carbon price, the carbon border adjustment. And the best approach is to have a multilateral response to that. Otherwise, there will be the trade tensions, trade barriers, and even trade wars. So I think through the new mechanism, new platform, as I mentioned, the first initiative, both China, United States, and the European Union are there. So it's a good platform for those major players to discuss, to see if they can find a multilateral approach to deal with those challenges.
Mm-hmm. Good. Great. Any last word? The time is up anyway. Thank you very much for your perspectives. Yes, I hope we all know what to do or somehow where we can at least grasp one of these low-hanging fruits to get a bit closer within the next 24 hours to 12 months. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you. Xie, muchas gracias. Vielen Dank. And merci beaucoup. De nada. Thank you so much. Xiachen Chang, Christian Guillermet, and Marie-Claire Graf, Thomas Vellacott, and Antoine Sich. Thank you. Good. Well, we're almost at the end, or we are, yes, at the end. But I would like to ask Patrick Audier to come up on stage for his closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Ladies and gentlemen, I will not be much longer tonight. Simply would like to thank all our speakers and panelists of the day. This has been a very intense discussion, and I think it has revealed that, yes, there are a lot of commitment possible, but there's less concrete action at this moment that have been really undertaken by some of us or all of us. But this is, of course, the purpose of the continuation of the Building Bridges Summit. And the coming days should allow us perhaps to build on some of the conclusions of the different seminars and different working sessions that we've had during the day. We intend to try to hold to the commitments that were already made at the Swiss, of course, financial sector level. But we also, and I also hope that the calls I made this morning for action will be followed by our industry. We thank you very much all for contributing to these ideas that can still be put to us all. We've listened also to the fact that there's been a lot said but less done, and I think again building bridges and this week will allow us perhaps to learn more about concrete action initiatives, and you will probably be able to judge yourself by Thursday night if this has been the case or not. I think the intention is here, lots has to be done, but at least we know in what direction we should work. Thank you very, very much. We apologize for having had to change a little bit the program tonight in terms of logistics. I think you've always been informed. We hope that we will be able to follow the sessions during the week. Thank you very much for joining us, and of course for continuously discuss with us what can be implemented in order to make this transition more effective and more rapid. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patrick Audier, also for putting this together. I would just like to mention Building Bridges is a community effort, and many people worked to make this happen. I would like to give a shout out to the 70 volunteers on site. I'm sure you met a few of them, then the 22 members of the work streams who were responsible for shaping the content of the week. As you heard, today is the beginning of that week. We have 77 events planned for you in the next 3 days. There's also a village at the Forum Genève, and you find all the information on the website or on the app. And also, please make sure to check your schedule and attend everything you signed up for, or then adjust the signing up in your profile, because we have just limited access to all the sessions. Well, it was a pleasure spending the day with you. Thank you very much. Have a good evening and goodbye. Hope to see you next time. Thank you.
Should a bank fight water scarcity? As an active member of the 2030 Water Resources Group, we are helping to create a water-secure world for all. We're on it. Should a bank clean up the ocean? We engage with companies creating ocean impact and preventing plastic pollution practices. We're on it.